What is going on, everyone? Just move this to the proper channels. Ew. Alright, let me just switch it out. There we go. Marxist.org. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Let me just make sure that the Twitch stream is working. Let me just make sure the sound is also working. Alright, sound is working. And Twitch is also working, which is good. Alright, so let's get into it. I'm going to be looking at the introductory syllabus, I think, under subject. Let's see, intro. There you go. So we're going to be looking at this introductory selections for intro to Marxism. I'm going to start with let's do a thesis on Feuerbach. Let's go down as they intended it. But what is going on with Firefox today, guys? Okay. Firefox is lagging for some stupid reason. It's my life. Alright, so what are we doing today? I'm just going to be reading and discussing the introductory texts that are recommended for Marxism. I read a lot of Marxist literature, but I thought it would be interesting to do the introductory texts that are recommended by Marxist.org. So that's kind of supposed to be your introduction to Marxism, so to say. I thought it would be an interesting exercise to partake in it. Alright. Let's see. According to Lenin, there are three sources and three component parts of Marxism: materialist philosophy, critique of political economy, and socialist politics. Let's see. Alright, this is just linking to Lenin's biography. Alright, so we're going to start off with thesis on Feuerbach. Let's see. Written by Marx in Brussels in the spring of 1845 under the title Ad Feuerbach. Marx's original text was published in 1924 in German and Russian translations by the Institute of Marxism-Leninism in Marx Engels Archives in Soviet Union. The English translation was first published in Lawrence and Weisert edition of the German Ideology in 1938. The widely known version of these theses is based on Engels' edited version, published as an appendix to his Ludwig Feuerbach in 1888, where he gave the title Thesis on Feuerbach. Ludwig Feuerbach. I've heard this name before, but I actually don't know who this person was. Ludwig Feuerbach was a German anthropologist, philosopher best known for his book The Essence of Christianity, It provides a critique of Christianity. Strongly influenced generations of later thinkers, including Darwin, Marx, Freud, Engels, Wagner, and Nietzsche. An associate of young Hegelian circles, Feuerbach advocated atheism and anthropological materialism. Many of his philosophical writings offered a critical analysis of religion. His thought was influential in the development of historical materialism, which is often recognized as a bridge between Hegel and Marx. Alright, cool. This is just someone who was influential in Marx. I think that's decent enough of an intro on this person. Let us see. Alright. Okay, so first thesis. The main defect of all hitherto existing materialism, that of Feuerbach included, is that object, actuality, sensuousness are conceived only in the form of the object, or of contemplation, but not as human sensuous activity. Practice, not subjectively. But not as human sensuous activity, practice, not subjectively. Hence it happened that the active side in opposition to materialism was developed by idealism. But only abstractly, since of course idealism does not know real sensuous activity as such. Feuerbach wants sensuous objects differentiated from thought objects, but he does not conceive human activity itself as objective activity. In the essence of Christianity, he therefore regards the theoretical attitude as the only genuinely human attitude, while praxis is conceived and defined only in its dirty Jewish form of appearance. Hence, he does not grasp the significance of revolutionary or practical critical activity. Alright, so I think Marx is just saying that Feuerbach is just too focused on theory. He does not, so on thought rather than practice, he doesn't give enough weightage to practice or praxis, as he's calling it. So let us then move on to the second thesis. The question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but is a practical question. Man must prove the truth, i.e. the reality and power, the this-sidedness. Man must prove the truth, the reality and power, the this-sidedness of his thinking in practice. The dispute over the reality or non-reality of thinking, which is isolated from practice, is purely a scholastic question. Alright, so is a practical question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking. Alright, so he's saying that man must prove the truth of the this-sidedness of his thinking. Of course I can't. Something is going on with Firefox. I might have to install a fresh copy. Anyway, third one, the materialist doctrine that men are products of circumstances and upbringing, and that therefore changed men are products of changed circumstances and changed upbringing, forgets that it is men who change circumstances and that the educator must himself be educated. Okay, hence this doctrine is bound to divide society into two parts, one of which is superior to society. The coincidence of the changing circumstances and of human activity, or self-change, can be conceived and rationally understood as revolutionary practice. The coincidence of the changing of circumstances, so a changing of circumstances and of human activity, or self-change, can be conceived and rationally understood as a revolutionary practice. Let's read that again. The materialist doctrine that men are products of circumstances and upbringing, and that therefore changed men are products of changed circumstances and changed upbringing. It forgets that it is men who change the circumstances and that the educator must himself be educated. Hence, this doctrine is bound to divide society into two, one of which is superior. The coincidence of the changing of circumstances and of human activity or self-change can be conceived and rationally understood as revolutionary practice. The coincidence of the changing circumstances. Alright, so changing of circumstances, people are changing it, and of human activity. Okay, so the coincidence of the changing of circumstances and of human activity, because Marx is saying that it's people who actually change their circumstances, then you have to understand this changing of circumstances and human activity as revolutionary practice. So you're essentially just changing your circumstances, so that then becomes revolutionary practice. See, so now moving on to number 4. Feuerbach starts off from the fact that starts from the fact of religious estrangement. So Feuerbach was an atheist. Of the duplication of the world into a religious imaginary world and a secular one. His work consists in resolving the religious world into its secular basis. He overlooks the fact that after completing his work, the chief thing still remains to be done. For the fact that secular basis lifts off from itself and establishes itself in the clouds as an independent realm can only be explained by the inner strife and intrinsic contradictoriness of the secular basis. The latter must itself be understood in its contradictions and then, by the removal of the contradictions, revolutionized. Thus, for instance, once the earthly family is discovered to be the secret of the Holy Family, the former must itself be annihilated, theoretically and practically. Alright, let's take it from the beginning. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Feuerbach starts off from the fact, this number 4 starts from the fact of religious self-estrangement. Starts off from the fact of religious self-estrangement. Alright. Of the duplication of the world into a religious imaginary world and a secular one. Alright, so saying religious self-estrangement, by believing in religion, I guess you are creating a religious imaginary world and a materialist secular world. Alright, still seems fairly easy to follow, or well, after some effort. Let's move on to number 5. No, not number 5. We're not done yet. His work consists in resolving the religious world into its secular basis. Alright, so Feuerbach is trying to resolve the religious imaginary world into a secular world. He overlooks the fact that after completing this work, that is of resolving religious into secular, the chief thing still remains to be done. And what is that, Marx? Tell us. For the fact that the secular basis lifts off from itself, and establishes itself in the clouds. So kind of like just like a rocket liftoff. And the secular basis lifts off from the ground, establishes itself in the clouds as an independent realm, can only be explained by the inner strife and intrinsic contradictoriness of this secular basis. Alright, let's take that again. For the fact that the secular basis lifts off from itself, it has to, because it doesn't believe in an imaginary realm. Alright, so it's lifting off itself, and it establishes itself in the clouds as an independent realm. And it's only able to do that because there's intrinsic contradictoriness of the secular basis. I don't know what that means. Anyways, let's go on. The latter must be understood in its contradiction, and then, by the removal of the contradiction, revolutionize. The latter being the secular world. So understand the contradiction of the secular world and remove it by revolutionizing it. All right. It's abstract, but I'm following. Thus, for instance, once the earthly family is discovered to be the secret of the holy family, the former, that is the earthly family, must be annihilated theoretically and practically. All right, this is pretty abstract, the fourth one. I don't fully get it, but let's keep moving. No point in getting stuck in one place. Just make sure. So there's music playing in the background as well, just checking that it's playing. Number 5 seems like an easy one. Let's see. Where did it go? There we go. Feuerbach, not falsified with abstract thinking, wants sensuous contemplation, but he does not conceive sensuousness as practical human sensuous activity. Alright, so Feuerbach wants to do away with abstract thinking and wants contract thinking, which is sensuous contemplation, but he does not conceive sensuous as practical human sensuous activity. Okay. Number 6. Oops. Damn it. Something going on with fucking Firefox. Alright. Feuerbach resolves the essence of religion into the essence of man. But the essence of man is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. In reality, it is the essence of the social relations. Feuerbach, who does not enter upon a criticism of this real essence, is hence obliged. But the essence of man is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. So Feuerbach is trying, this is number 6, Feuerbach is trying to resolve the essence of man into essence of religion into the essence of man. He's trying to understand religion through what it means to be man, I guess, or human. But the essence of man is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. So Marx is saying that the essence of man, it's not like this abstract thing that exists in each individual. In reality, it is the ensemble of the social relation. That, I think, also makes sense. What it means to be man depends on the interactions of social relations. Feuerbach, who does not enter upon a criticism of this real essence, that is of ensemble of social relationships, is hence obliged, number 1, to abstract from the historical process and to define the religious sentiment regarded by itself and to presuppose an abstract isolated human individual. Alright, since Feuerbach doesn't engage with this ensemble of the social relations, he is abstracting in the first point. He's abstracting humanness to an isolated abstract human individual. He's not actually looking at the collective, essentially. The essence, therefore, can by him only be regarded as species, as an inner dumb generality, which unites many individuals only in a natural way. The essence, therefore, can by him only be regarded as species. Alright, I don't get that, honestly. Alright, let's move on to number 7. I have some idea what he's talking about. He's saying, essentially, what is he saying, Feuerbach? The essence can therefore by him only be regarded as species or generality, which unites. Alright, so according to Feuerbach, according to Feuerbach thinks that the essence of human or being a man can be regarded as species, something that unites people in a natural way. Number 7, Feuerbach consequently does not see that the religious sentiment is itself a social product, and that the abstract individual that he analyzes belongs in reality to a particular social form. Is itself a social form. Alright, so religious sentiment is a social product. That's what he's saying here. And that abstract individuals belong to social forms. Makes sense. Religious sentiment comes from social product. He's not talking about religion itself, but religious sentiment, which I would argue makes sense by itself. Alright, all social life is essentially practical. All mysteries which lead theory to mysticism find their rational solution in human practice and in the comprehension of this practice. All social life is essentially practical. I think so, yeah. All social life is essentially practical. Let's think through it. Social life, interacting with society or interacting with other people, is practical. You have to do some kind of work. You have to do some kind of practice. That might even just be virtual practice in our current world, like talking on Zoom, engaging in online video games. It's still some amount of effort being exerted there, some conscious engagement, hence practice. All mysteries which lead theory to mysticism find their rational solution in human practice and in the comprehension of this practice. All right, so all mysteries which lead theory to mysticism. Right, so theory being an explanation of the world, to mysticism, ascribing that said mysticism to that theory, to some abstract, unknowable thing, I think. Number 9. The highest point reached by contemplative materialism, that is materialism, which does not comprehend sensuousness as practical activity, is the contemplation of single individuals and of civil society. Alright, so he's saying the contemplative materialism, which apparently is Feuerbach's materialism, does not comprehend practical activity, essentially. It's looking at individuals as, well, individuals, not as group of individuals or as society. Number 10. The standpoint of all materialism in civil society. The standpoint of the new is human society or social humanity. The standpoint of all materialism is civil society. The standpoint of the new is human society or social humanity. Okay. There we go. There's the famous Marx line. Philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. Right, that was an interesting read, a quick read. Don't think there's much to add there or subtract from there. It's just Marx writing about the sort of his interpretation of Feuerbach, which I think is fine. Nothing really to add or subtract here. Alright, let's move on to the next one, which is Idealism and Materialism from German Ideology. Let's see. Idealism and materialism. Oh wow, this is a fairly long one. Right. Oh no, I think I opened the wrong one. Alright, let's see. So, thesis on Feuerbach is fairly abstract. We can take it to mean that Marx is kind of saying we have to actually do activity, actually engage with the world to revolutionize it, which I think is best summarized by the last thesis, which is that philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. right? I think that is fairly simple. The German ideology, opposition of the materialist and idealist outlook, idealism and materialism. Right. So, before we get into it, this is a pretty long essay, essentially, or writing, that I am going to not read word for word. I'm just going to read each paragraph and then kind of just explain my understanding of it. I think that is actually the best part, and actually I'm going to take some notes with it. You open up my note-taking app. Let's do this. Notepad. I'm going to be reading this and taking my notes. But दुश्मनों से क्या शिकवा क्या गिला रकीबों से we're doing what is the name of this piece? Idealism and materialism. All right. Alright, if you're following along, this is what I'm reading right now. I think I definitely need to install a fresh copy of this browser. I'm just going to drop it in the chat. Where is the chat? Just give me a minute. Ooh. What? Okay. I think yesterday I was at my Muay Thai class and took a few too many kicks. Alright, I gotta go use the restroom really quick. I'll be back. Alright, I gotta go use the restroom. I'll be back in a few minutes. Until then, enjoy the music. And if you're reading along, just continue reading. Right back. Let's get to some reading. Alright. What are we doing? Yep. Alright, so I'm just reading and taking notes on the German ideology, idealism and materialism. I am following the introduction to beginner's guide to Marxism and idealism and materialism. That's the one I'm reading and taking notes. If anybody wants to follow along, let's do this. Reading this. Following this reading list. Alright, and I'm going to pin this for, let's say, 60-minute. Oh, okay. So 30 minutes. Alright. Unpin after. Alright, so we are reading Idealism and Materialism. What I'm going to do here is, let me just turn down the music a bit. What I'm going to do here is read a paragraph and so on, and then kind of just give my thoughts on it and also make my notes. Alright, so let's get to the illusion of German ideology. Alright, so the first paragraph, or the first paragraph and a line, Marx is talking about, this was published in 1845, that's 3 years before the European revolutions that happened. Essentially what Marx is saying here is that there have been, last few years, there has been a lot of ideological or a revolution happening in the ideological sphere. So people kind of coming up with new ideas, and he says it starts with the decomposition of the Hegelian philosophy, which begins with Strauss, and then and it kind of becomes like this cascading thing in which a lot of previous ideas, which he calls powers of the past, are swept. And he says it's actually even bigger than the French Revolution, which, okay, it's definitely a way to bring up attention to something. So he's saying this is a huge revolution that has happened in the sphere of the mind, or sphere of the ideas, this is something of note for Marx. Let's see how he kind of establishes things. So I'm going to also take notes. So let me just write down a note for that. Let's do... Alright, let's move on to the next paragraphs. Hey, where's username ever? Nice. Who is fighting tonight? I don't know, I think I'm gonna see if I can find something to watch later on tonight. Don't feel like ordering a UFC fight though. Isn't that like, who is, let's see, UFC. Okay, so today Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya are fighting. Okay. Jorge Masvidal. Yeah, I don't know. I also gotta get some work done tonight. I probably won't be watching. I might watch some highlights later on. But that sounds like a fun fight. Just looked at the main card. Right, let's read the next paragraph. Putrescence. Let's see. Putrescent. Undergoing the process of decay. Alright, rotting. Okay, so he's saying in this paragraph that essentially saying that this death of previous powers of the past opened up a essentially market for essentially just people trying to, or he says industrialists of philosophy trying to use this decomposing caput mortuum, so decaying corpse, I guess, and form new substances out of it, and they were fighting with each other, and it seemed like there was competition, and then it didn't go anywhere, and then we were told that it was of world significance, and was it really? That is what he's saying here. Next, move on to... Alright, so I'm not reading each paragraph just because I don't think that's the best way of doing it. In the first version of the clean copy, there follows the passage is crossed out. Alright, this is crossed out. I'm not going to read it. Let's do... What is going on with my Firefox? Alright. Next section, ideology in general, German ideology in particular. So, the first paragraph of this. Alright, okay, so Marx is kind of running a little bit of defense, you can say, for Hegel. Hegel was essentially Marx's teacher, or not specifically, but someone that Marx learned from reading his philosophy. He's building on top of Hegel. Without Hegel, there can really be no Marx. So Marx, in this very first paragraph, is saying that, you know, this German criticism that is happening of the philosophy or German ideology of essentially just overthrowing pre-existing ideas, it's really nothing but then just people kind of picking and choosing different aspects of Hegel after having completely overthrown Hegel, and then trying to come up with like new things based off that. So if you're being done with Hegel, just be done with it. That's how I read it. Alright, now reading the second paragraph. Oof, oh my god, this is really annoying. Alright, let's see if I can highlight this. Alright, this is what I'm reading now. Alright, there's a lot happening in this paragraph. Let's see, Saint Max. Oh, Max Stirner, okay, German anarchist philosopher. Alright, let's read this again. What is going on? It's either my browser or this. Alright, the entire body of German philosopher. Alright, so in these two paragraphs, let's see, Marx, as I said, is kind of still running defense for Hegel. And Marx is saying, well, Hegel has been usurped by these new Hegelians. They're kind of questioning everything, discarding everything, doing away with things. It's a revolution which he says is actually even bigger and larger than the French Revolution. Alright, so he's saying that all these people, these young Hegelians, their critics started from real religion and actual theology. So the entire body of German philosophical criticism, from Strauss to Stirner, is confined to the criticism of religious conceptions. Alright, so he's saying that they started out as or they were largely just criticizing concepts or religious concepts, and then they got so extensively into it that everything was a religious conception to them. So they were just criticizing everything and saying this is religious, that is religious, everything is religious, and that is how they kind of looked at the world from this point of view. And then eventually Max Stirner comes and it canonizes it en bloc and thus disposes of it once and for all. So he's saying in the old Hegelians and the young Hegelians, the old Hegelians kind of reduced everything to the master-slave relationship or to Hegelian logical category and understood it. Young Hegelians are criticizing everything and reducing it to a theological matter. So everything is theology, everything is a religious relationship. And Marx actually says that they then converted into a cult of law, cult of state, etc. The young Hegelians and old Hegelians are in agreement that in their belief in the rule of religion, or of concepts of universal principles. It's just that they're both in an agreement in the importance of them, or the importance that they hold in society en bloc. What they're in a not agreement about is that the young Hegelians actually see it as negative, I guess, right? Let's see. So the old Hegelians see it as legitimate, and the new Hegelians essentially want to usurp it. This one last paragraph of this section. Let's move on to this. And I'm not going to read word for word, I'm just going to read it. If you're following along, there's a pinned comment. Actually, let me adjust the pinned comment. Let's remove this. Unpin this message. Alright, I'm going to post this right here as the pinned comment that I'm reading. So let me pin this. Okay, so if you want to follow along, here's the pinned article in the comments, and I'm reading this passage right here. Alright, so in these two paragraphs, or the one paragraph and an extra line, Marx is saying that young Hegelians imagine conception, thoughts, ideas as products of consciousness, and as such they also understand product, thoughts, ideas as the real chains of men, and that if they just exchanging their present consciousness for human, critical, or self-egoistic consciousness, and of removing their limitations, they're saying, well, these are just like imagined limitations, so just get over them. But then Marx criticizes them, saying that they're just fighting against phrases. They're fighting the phrases of the world without actually fighting, I guess, the things that they want to combat in the world. Alright, let me just take some notes on this specific, these three paragraphs. Alright, I think I have everything here that I need from this section. Just looking at my notes. Just add one more point. Alright, I think I got the last point as well in my notes, so that if I ever need to look at them again, I can. Alright, moving on to the next section. First premise of materialist method. This part, I'm just going to read this in one go and then I'll be back.
Never anyone to share the game. A man who lived in dreams.
All right, first premises of materialist method. The first premise Marx lays out here is that people the first premise of all human history is, of course, the existence of the living human individual. And it says thus the first fact to be established is the physical organization of these individuals and their consequent relation with the rest of the nature. Of course, we cannot here go either into the actual physical nature of man or into the natural condition in which man finds himself, geological, hydrographical, climatic, and so on. The writing of history must always set out from these natural bases and their modification in the course of history through the action of men. Alright, so first premise of materialist method. First premise of, I'm taking notes as well, just a minute. This is fairly simple to follow. Is that men exist and they interact with their Alright, so the first premise of materialist method is that people, or men in this case, exist, or humans exist, and that they exist in a setting, and then they actually change it. And he says that what separates humans from animals is that they begin to distinguish themselves from animal as soon as they produce their means of subsistence. And by that, indirectly producing their material life. So that's an important, I think, point. Okay, alright, so men or humans begin to distinguish themselves from animals, according to Marx. Yeah, that's no worse news anyway. I'm just trying to also kind of work through these things as well. And that's the thing about philosophy. It's not easy. You just have to kind of have to. Well, just give me a second. What just happened? All right, sorry. Just gotta pop up. Saying, yeah, that's the thing about philosophy. You just gotta struggle through it. I don't think philosophy is easy for anyone. So let's do this. All right. So in the first premises of materialist method, Marx is saying at the beginning, the first premise of anything or all human history is the existence of living human individuals. But these individuals don't just exist anywhere. They exist in natural bases. As a result, they interact with the world and change it. That's the important thing. So Marx says that men or humans can be distinguished from animals by various things, such as consciousness, by religion, or a bunch of other things. But they begin to really distinguish themselves from animals for Marx when they start producing their own means of survival, their own means of existence, and as a result start producing let's see what he actually says. So he says that they begin to produce their means of subsistence, a step which is conditioned by their physical organization. How they subsist, so like for example, a step. So he says a step which is conditioned by their physical organization. What does that mean? So what I think it means is that how they're organized, like is it an individual or are they hunter-gatherers? Is it a community? So their means of subsistence would then change based on how they are organized physically. Like, are they organized as a hunter-gatherer? Is it one person? Is it three people? Is it a community? Is it a village? Because then it differs, right? Because if you're a hunter-gatherer, you're hunting and gathering and eating. But if you're a village, a community, then you might be doing agriculture or things that are more complicated, right? So that is what Marx is saying here. So this is something that is being complicated. Let's see. He says the way in which men produce their means of subsistence depends first of all on the nature of actual means of subsistence they find in existence and have to reproduce. Okay, this is fairly simple. So they can only produce subsistence that they find around themselves, right? So if you are, for example, in Antarctica, you're not going to end up cooking Indian food because that's just not what you're surrounded with, and vice versa, right? This mode of production must not be considered simply as being the production of the physical existence of the individual. Rather, it is a definite form of activity of these individuals, a definite form of expressing their life, a definite mode of life on their part. Alright, so he's saying there's like, it's not just them producing things randomly, it's them kind of infusing their own activity, their own kind of, they're interacting with the world essentially. As individuals express their life, so they are. What they are, therefore, coincides with their production, but with what they produce and how they produce. The nature of individuals thus depends on the material conditions determining their production. The nature of individuals thus depends on the material conditions. So let's kind of wrap this up. First premises of the materialist method. What is Marx saying here? He is saying that the basic premise of any historical understanding is that there are living human individuals. And they interact with nature. And they don't just interact with any nature. They interact with the nature that is surrounding them. As such, and they start to distinguish themselves from animals as soon as they start creating subsistence. Yep, this is definitely philosophical. We're reading Karl Marx's philosophy, specifically this introduction, opposition of the materialist and idealist outlook. So Marx is writing this in 1845. That's when a lot of people called the young Hegelians are around. And the young Hegelians have kind of in the philosophical world overthrown, in the thought processes, overthrown the previously what Marx calls powers of the past. And they're kind of reimagining the world, and Marx is criticizing them that they think they're putting out really new ideas, but what they're really just doing is grabbing things that were already there, and like, he uses like some really out there language, like saying there's like this rotting carcass and they're taking up different parts of that carcass and saying, hey, see, I just created something new. It's not really new. That's what he's saying here. And in the materialist method, he's kind of laying out the basis of materialism. He says the very basics of materialism is that humans exist, that living humans exist. They don't just exist, they exist in certain natural circumstances. And those circumstances, and what separates humans in those circumstances from animals, is the fact that they can produce their own subsistence. And they can't just produce any subsistence. They can only produce what they're surrounded by, right? So if you're in the Arctic or Antarctic, right, you're going to produce certain kind of subsistence. If you look at, for example, food, if you're in the Arctic, you're not going to end up producing the subsistence that, for example, someone in China or India would have, right? So your food would be different, your material outlook would be different, how you dress, how you interact with nature, and so on would be different, right? And this is, and he says that it's not just you kind of interacting with this nature in one way. Nature is also kind of forming you in its way, and that would obviously change depending on where you are. Or at least that's how I read it. Yeah, that's kind of what it means. All right, so next one, woo. This is a long passage. I think we're like, oops, a little bit, damn it, my Firefox is, it's either my Firefox or this website, Marxist.org, which is really giving me a lot of trouble. All right, so we're number 3, and how many subsections are there? There's 5 subsections. All right, let's try to finish this today. Production and intercourse, division of labor and forms of property, tribal, ancient, feudal. All right. Before I jump into it, I'm going to go make some coffee because I have read this portion before, and it is, yeah, there's a lot we're gonna have to break down one by one. So I'll be right back in, let's say, 3 to 4 minutes. That's just how long it's gonna take my coffee maker to make coffee. So I'm gonna make that coffee, I'll be back, and then we'll jump into this next section. Until then, I'm gonna turn up the music, and I'll be back in about, let's say, 5 minutes just to be safe. All right, I'm back. Let's see. We were getting to the meaty part of this. Oops, what did I just do? All right, we were getting into the meaty part of this, which is production and intercourse, division of labor and forms of property, tribal, ancient, feudal. Let's do it one paragraph at a time. Oops. Long throw. All right. That's this one. I'm just gonna read it and I'm just gonna tell my thoughts. Alright, so in the very first paragraph, this one right here, the relation of different nations among themselves depends on the degree of the development of the production. How long am I going to stream for? Until I finish this piece, which I think might be like another hour, half an hour to an hour. Yeah, that's because I know if I stop streaming, and I most likely am not going to finish this piece, frankly. All right, let's see. So in this paragraph, Marx is saying that the relationship of one nation to another depends on the development of their productive forces, which is the division of labor and internal intercourse. That's the combination of productive forces. So in this statement is generally understood to be correct, but only in relation of one nation to another. But Marx wants us to look at the internal structure of a nation, because he thinks that the nation's internal structure depends on its current stage of development, which makes sense. Its internal structure would be representative of how far along it's come in the stage of development. And he thinks that, if this is the main line of this paragraph, how far the productive forces of a nation are developed is shown most manifestly by the degree to which division of labor has been carried out. And this is new productive forces. So let's see, let me just make this note. This is important. So development of productive forces. Forces is directly proportional to division of labor. All right, so the development of productive forces are proportionally proportional to the division of labor. So each new productive force adds to that extension of division of labor, but it needs to be new. So he says it won't count, for example, if you're adding more land to cultivation. It would have to be like something new that didn't already exist. All right, that is, I think, fairly okay to follow. All right, now this paragraph right here, and then this one extra line. Let's move on. All right. So he's saying in this paragraph right here, the division of labor inside a nation at first leads to separation of industrial and commercial from agricultural labor. So when you start doing division of labor, it creates a separation between the agricultural laborers or farmers and peasants and industrial and commercial laborers, which then further leads into so it's you start off in these two and then you go forward and it leads into more. The industrial and commercial then further separate, that causes further divisions, and then you can go further along and you'll see more divisions in there as well. So industrial and commercial would have their own divisions, and where you are in this hierarchy and how they kind of, I guess, relate to each other as Marx sees it, is it depends on the methods employed, right, of within those industries, whether that is patriarchalism, slavery, estates, classes, and so on. So that's what he's saying. Yeah. And then he says there's different kinds of divisions of labor, and now we're going to get into, he's saying different kinds of division of labor depend on the kind of ownership, and that's what we're going to get into, the first form of ownership. So let me just read this and then I'll give my thoughts. All right, first form of ownership is tribal. So he's going to lay out three forms of ownership. The very first one is tribal. And tribal, it means this is an underdeveloped form of production where people live by hunting and gathering, so hunting, fishing, and so on. And then, what then? Let me just move this up here. Okay. So, hunting and gathering, and in its highest stage, it leads to agriculture, and agriculture is obviously agriculture, large swaths of land that are uncultivated. And it says at this stage, that is agriculture. So tribal is an underdeveloped form of ownership, and in this, people, as we said, depend either on hunting, gathering, fishing, or agriculture. If you're in agriculture, the relationship or the division of labor in this case is reminiscent of the familial structure, right? It already kind of mimics the existing division of labor in the family, right? It's just an extension of that. So you'll have patriarchal family chieftains, and then you'll have people below them, and finally slaves. And the important thing that Marx says here, that's kind of, I think, important to highlight, is the slavery latent in the family only develops gradually with the increase of population, the growth of wants, and the extension of external relations, both of war and barter. So while there are slaves here, it's only when you start developing further along this mode of production or the form of ownership that you start seeing the latent slavery that exists in families. All right, so let me just make some notes for this. Alright, let's move on to the next second form of ownership. That's this paragraph right here. Just gonna read this and I'll give my thoughts. Alright, it's a decent amount of stuff here. I'm gonna reread this part again, and just give me like a minute. Alright, so the second form of ownership is the ancient communal and state ownership. So over here, Marx lays out that this is essentially when different towns or so on kind of come together to form a city and so on, either by agreement or by conquest, right? So let me just highlight this again. Alright, And here is when we start seeing, so there's number one, the dominant form of property is communal property, or communal ownership. And then over here he says we find movable and then later immovable property, private property developing, which is subordinate to the communal ownership. So it is developing, but it's not the dominant form of property. Citizens hold powers over their laboring slaves, but only in their community. And this kind of communal ownership is what holds together this society. And then as it kind of starts developing private property, and that leads to the devolution of the ancient communal and state ownership. Because now there is movable and then immovable private property developing. And this causes later on to find antagonisms between the state and the people, town and the country. And even within them, you will find further, like within the town, you'll find antagonisms between industry and maritime commerce, right? And the class relation, Marx says here, between the citizens and the slave, once you get to that point where immovable private property has developed, you will start finding these antagonisms, and now you can finally call the relationships between citizens and slave as completely developed. And then he's just kind of comparing like how in the ancient Rome, he says, with the development of private property, we find here for the first time the same conditions which we shall find again, only on a more extensive scale, with modern private property. On the one hand, the concentration of private property, which began very early in Rome, as the Licinian agrarian law proves, and proceeded very rapidly from the time of civil wars and especially under the emperors. On the other hand, coupled with this, the transformation of the plebeian small peasantry into a proletariat, which, however, owing to its intermediate position between the propertied citizens and slaves, never achieved an independent development. Alright, so he's saying that private property kind of started under the Romans, and it really expanded with the kind of, wars and so on. And there was this these plebeians who were being made proletarians, but because of the mode of production of that time, they were never able to achieve independent development. That's what I got from this portion. So let me just make some notes on this so I can then move on. Alright, just a minute. All right, so let's move on to the third form of ownership, which is feudal or estate property. All right, I'm going to read this paragraph and then explain what I think. I think it's this website. It's causing this delay or lag on my side. All right. I'm going to read all these paragraphs, which are just a few more, just to make sure I have everything on its head, not on its head, everything set. All right, the third form, feudal or estate property. This is what I was looking at. So the third form, the initial one was tribal form. Second one was ancient communal or state ownership. Third one is feudal. So in feudal, Marx says that feudal property develops at the collapse of the Roman Empire. As it is collapsing and the Romans had expanded quite a lot, and the state was, I guess, no longer there to defend that empire, it ended up becoming into fiefdom's feudal system, which then in Marx's case, or in Germany, was superimposed by the Germanic militant constitution, or military constitution, I guess. Not the actual constitution, but just like the way of doing things. Right, and at the core of this system is the peasant, the serf, bonded to the land, and there is a hostility towards the towns, where you'll see industrialists who are also merchants. But as the production kind of goes on, you find journeymen and masters. So there's an exploitative relationship there as well, right? So there is the peasant-lord relationship, where the lord is collecting rents from the peasants, but there is also the relationship between master and the right. So and the master and the journeyman, right? But he says that even during this, even at the heyday of feudalism, there was not much division of labor, and that kind of defined this system. The separation of industry and commerce was found already in existence in older towns. In newer, it developed later when the towns entered into mutual relationships, and then the feudal kingdoms were organized, and at its head was a monarch. Right. So let me just make some notes on it. Alright, so that's that. Let's see, so that's number 4. Right. This, I think, I'm fairly certain it is this website. Alright, let's move on to Essence of Materialist Conception of History, Social Being and Social Consciousness. How long are we streaming for? Let's see. 2 hours and 11 minutes. Longer than I thought I was going to. Alright, just give me a minute. Gotta check something before I get into it. So, for anyone joining just now, I'm doing the reading from the introductory reading list of Marxists.org. We're reading the Marx piece, Idealism and Materialism, where we just read about different forms of ownership, the three being the very first one being being tribal, the second one being ancient communal and state ownership, the third one that I was just talking about being feudal. Now we're moving into this section of the piece, which is the essence of the materialist conception of history. So just going to do this is, instead of taking notes for each paragraph, just read the entire thing, discuss it, and then take notes. See if that is better. Because right now what I'm doing is I'm reading each section and then just taking notes per paragraph. Right, let's see this. So I'm going to read this paragraph right here and then report back on what I think. Alright, so in this very first paragraph, Marx is saying that if you are a person, you are going to enter into these social and political relationships, and they're going to create political and social structures. The social structure and state itself appearing out of these interactions. And these interactions of these social structures are not appearing as they exist in someone's mind, but as they come out of these interactions of people with material conditions. That was an easier paragraph to follow, frankly. Alright, just a minute. पूछ परिज़ादों से ये हिजर कैसे झेला है तो चलनी है और रूह पर बिछाए हैं Sorry, you just have to take care of this stuff. Alright, let's move on to the next paragraph. This is an interesting paragraph. Let me read this again. Alright, so he's saying that essentially production of ideas, conceptions, consciousness is directly involved with the material activity of people. So this is the main kind of sentence here. Consciousness can never be anything else than conscious existence, and the existence of men is their actual life processes. This one, oops. Alright, so he's saying in contrast to German philosophy, he's specifically talking about Hegelianism, where ideas are secondary to the observer or to the person, subject matter, subject idea objectivity or something like that. Anyways, he's saying over here in the materialist conception of the world, we actually look at ideas, things, morality, metaphysics, all these things. He says morality, religion, metaphysics, all the rest of ideology and their corresponding form of consciousness thus no longer retain the semblance of independence. They have no history, no development, but men developing their material production and their material intercourse alter along with this their real existence, their thinking, and the product of their thinking. Alright, so he's saying they're kind of just coming out of the interactions of active interactions of people in society as individuals and so on and so on. That was a Zizek reference. Alright, let's proceed. Alright, if you don't know, I'm also streaming this simultaneously on YouTube. So if you do !socials, you will be able to get my YouTube link. If you want to follow me there, I'm going to be putting some more stuff there. Anyways, let's get back to the next paragraph. Alright, so he's saying that the materialist understanding of the world, it does have its own premises, right? And he says that those premises are that It started with its premise are men, not in any fantastic isolation, but in their actually empirically perceptible process of development and definite conditions. Alright, so he's saying that the main sort of premise of materialist philosophy is that people are not just existing in some fantastic isolation, but they are being changed by their material conditions, the mode of production they live in, and so on. And it says, as soon as this active life process is described, history ceases to be a collection of dead facts, as it is with empiricists, themselves still abstract, or an imagined activity of imagined subjects, as with idealists. Alright, cool. Very cool. Last paragraph for this section. I'm just going to read this and then I'll give my thoughts. Alright, he's kind of just summarizing what he just said, that activity of people is kind of what defines materialist philosophy. Let me just take this note down. Alright, let's just kind of summarize this section of number 4. Alright. Alright, so he's kind of differentiating materialist conception of history from the previously existing German ideology. He's saying that previously the ideas were thought to be creating world. He's saying, but here's actually the actually materialist people, men in this case, are creating the ideas, that they're coming out of there. It says men are the producers of their own conception ideas, i.e. real active men that are conditioned by a definite development of their productive forces and of the intercourse corresponding to these up to its furthest forms. So yeah, that's kind of the crux of this section. All right, so this section, so we're only 2 sections left: history, fundamental conditions, private property and communism, and then just like 2 quick paragraphs. All right, so let's finish strong. I think maybe we need another 20 minutes. I am definitely feeling it, and by that, it being that tired. I'm feeling tired. Oh yeah, if you are not following the channel, follow the channel. Let's do that. Do exclamation point follow. What just happened? All right. Yippers. All right. So follow the channel if you're not following the channel. Do so. It really helps me, keeps me going, and so on. Alright, so let's get to this part. Alright, I'm actually really happy that I'm able to get through this, and thank you for everyone who joined. Going to be doing more of these streams where we essentially spend Saturdays just reading about socialism. Going to convert all you losers to socialists. Alright, so just give me a minute. Gotta pee. All this coffee is just sitting in my bladder. Alright guys, I am back. Give me a minute. Just give me a minute. एक मिनट खलो जा. Alright, just give me a minute. I'm going to order some food, which I'll pick up once this ends. The stream, that is. Alright, had to order some food. Let's get to it. History, fundamental conditions. Just gonna read this passage. I'll get back to everyone. Alright, so first paragraph, I just went to put my food on heat. Alright, it's a very simple thing that he's saying. History's fundamental conditions is that number one, you must be able to satisfy your basic needs. What are those? Like eating, drinking, and so on. Let's see, history, basic conditions. Number one, satisfy basic needs. Pretty self-explanatory. The second point, what is going on with this website? Alright, second point is satisfying of this need creates more needs, right? Creates more needs. Taking down notes. Right. Oops. Just erased all that. Nope. Where's my eraser up? Okay. This. Alright, and then since in this context he's talking about the Germans, which are the young Hegelians, or sorry, the older Hegelians, the old Hegelians who ascribe theological explanation to everything. He is saying that's garbage, and the Germans just call this prehistory, but never tell us how to get from prehistory to history. And history being where you satisfy basic needs such as eating, drinking, and so on, and which creates further needs. Alright, let's see, what is the next basic condition of history? Oops, let's see. Alright, he's saying people who, or men who remake their lives daily, create other people, essentially a family, and that this concept of, or this should be looked at empirical data, not by this imagined concept of family. All right. Let's see what's the next paragraph saying. Do I have the mic on? I do have the mic on, okay. Start with this nagging suspicion in the back of my head saying, oh, you don't have the mic on, you idiot. All right. Alright, Marx is getting spicy, guys. He's saying that production of one's life and our needs and satisfying those needs creates essentially a family. Family creates social relationship. The social relationships then cause, and he says that this social relationship is then to be looked at as a productive force in itself. A productive force. And then he gets really spicy on the Germans. He says that the Germans, they don't have any sense. They lack the sense to actually comprehend this fact. Because he's saying it is very obvious that this exists, but these old Hegelians that he's kind of ranting on, these old Hegelians don't want to look at it. They're just like, everything is theology, right? Or, they're saying that all these old Hegelians were like, oh, all these ideas are creating things. Things are not creating ideas, or anything, actually. That's what I think it means. I could be wrong, but that's the point. Like, you kind of just try to analyze things on your own. Alright, I was hoping to be able to finish this piece, but what I'm going to do is finish this section and maybe call it a day. Or let's see how far we can get. Just gonna read this passage, then I'll give my thoughts. Alright, he's pretty much more or less, it's a pretty lengthy passage, but more or less what Marx is saying is that consciousness and language kind of develop at a certain level of historical development, right? What he calls consciousness. That's pretty much what he's saying. All right, private property and communism. Let's read this and call it a night. Alright, main thing trying to take over from this passage is that Marx compares family and especially the patriarchal relationships within family to slavery. Interesting. Let's kind of read it together. With the division of labor, come on. I think my browser is just giving me a lot of trouble. With the division of labor in which all these contradictions are implicit and which in its turn is based on the natural division of labor in the family and the separation of society into individual families opposed to one another. So society as families, they're opposed to one another, is given simultaneously the distribution and indeed in unequal distribution, both qualitative and quantitative, of labor and its products, hence property. Alright, he's saying, so some people, everybody's doing work, but some people are getting more, some people are getting less. Nucleus, the first form of which lies property, of which lies in the family, where wife and children are the slaves of the husband. The latent slavery in the family, though still very crude, is the first property. But even at this early stage, it corresponds perfectly to the definition of modern economists, who call it the power of disposing of the labor power of others. And that is true. At the time that Marx is writing it, husbands are able to dispose of the labor power of the wife and child as they saw fit, since the women were the property of men. Interesting. Right. Division of labor and private property are moreover identical expressions. In the one, the same thing is affirmed with reference to activity as is affirmed in the other with the reference to production of activity. Let's read that again. Division of labor and private property are moreover identical. How so? In the one, the same thing is affirmed with reference to activity, that is the division of labor, as with the other with reference to the product of activity. Alright, let's move on to the next paragraph. It's getting spicy. Marx was quite a spicy bitch. Alright. Further, the division of labor implies the contradiction between the interest of the separate individual or the individual family and the communal interest of all individuals who have intercourse with one another. So it's saying there's a contradiction between a family or individual who owns private property and the community, because you're kind of hoarding things at that point essentially. And indeed, this communal interest does not exist merely in the imagination as the general interest, but first of all in reality as the mutual interdependence of the individuals among whom labor is divided. Okay, and finally, the division of labor offers us the first example of how, as long as man remains in natural society, that is, as long as a cleavage exists between the particular and the common interest, as long therefore as activity is not voluntarily but naturally divided, man's own deed form becomes an alien power opposed to him, which enslaves him instead of being controlled by him. For as soon as distribution of labor comes into being, each man has a particular exclusive sphere of activity which is forced upon him and from which he cannot escape. He is a hunter, a fisherman, a herdsman, or a critical critic, and must remain so if he does not want to lose his means of livelihood. While in communist society, where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, society regulates the general population and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today, another tomorrow. To hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, reel cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind without ever becoming a hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. The fixation of social activity, this consolidation of what we produce ourselves into an objective power above us. Let's read that again. This fixation of social activity, this consolidation of what we ourselves produce into an objective power above us, growing out of our control, thwarting our expectations, bringing to naught our calculations, is one of the chief factors in historical development up to now. All right, a lot of stuff going on there. Let's just recap important things. He's saying that up until this point, there has been historical development, but now we're at a point where division of labor, which is how you measure or is proportional to let me just highlight this again, this damn thing keeps going away. All right, this is the passage we're discussing right now. So the division of labor is how you measure proportional development of the productive forces. Marx says that now in this capitalist system, private property is a representation of that. And because the division of labor is so bad, people are now regimented to what they can do, and if they want to earn money, to satisfy basic needs, to take care of their family, and so on, they cannot and must not deviate from that. But in a communist society, where you're all labor is valued regardless of what it's producing, you can be a fisherman in the morning, a hunter in the evening, a critic at night, and so on. All right. All right, the social power, i.e. multiplied productive force, which arises through cooperation of different individuals as it is determined by the division of labor, appears to these individuals, since their cooperation is not voluntary, but has come about naturally, not as their own united power, but as an alien force outside of them, of the origin and goal of which they are ignorant, which thus they cannot control, which on the contrary passes through a peculiar series of phases and stages independent of the will and action of man, nay, even being the prime governor of these. Alright, it's saying essentially that division of labor is kind of imposed on people and essentially just rules their life, and they don't know why. How otherwise could property have had a history at all, have taken on different forms? Landed property, for example, according to different premises given, have proceeded in France from parcellation to centralization in the hands of a few. In England, from centralization in the hands of a few to parcellation, as is actually the case today. Or how does it happen that trade, which after all is nothing more than exchange of products of various individuals and countries, rules the world through the relationship of supply and demand, a relation which, as an English economist says, hovers over the earth like the fate of the ancients, and with an invisible hand allots fortunes and misfortune to men, sets up empires and overthrows empire, causes nations to rise and disappear. While the abolition of the basis of property with the communistic regulation of production, and implicit in this the destruction of the alien relationship between men and what they must themselves produce, the power of the relationship of supply and demand is dissolved into nothing, and men get exchange, production, the mode of their mutual relationship under their control again. Spicy stuff. Let's see. He's saying, all right, so we're seeing parceling of property, private property happening in different forms, in France differently, in England differently. And then I think he's mentioning Adam Smith when he says that this relationship of supply and demand is causing empires to fall, nations to rise and disappear, and it hangs over the people as a as what he calls the fate of the ancients, as if there is no way outside of it, that it's predetermined. But he says, and this is important, in a communistic society we will put regulations on the production. There will not be any overproduction, and that will put in this power of men, being people, the relation of supply and demand, and they'll be able to, and men will be able to get exchange production, the mode of their mutual relationship, under their control. All right, guys, this ended up being a longer stream than I was expecting it to be. I'm really glad that it is what it is. I really enjoyed it. And I'm gonna log off because I gotta go and eat my food. I am very hungry. This is I'm restarting essentially Socialism Saturday. Tomorrow is Easter, so I won't be doing the Socialism Sunday. I have done in the past Socialism Sunday. This is where I'll be essentially doing intro to Marxism readings and discussions and so on, if you would like to know that. And also during the weekdays, Monday to Friday, I do study streams if you want to follow along, or work streams, not necessarily study streams. If you want to follow along, please follow the channel. And I am starving, so I gotta head out. Thank you for joining. This was really fun. Got to talk to some great people today in the chat. Thank you for joining. If you haven't already followed the channel, follow the channel. I'll see you next time.